Welcome to Loud Truth. Air Force One touched down in Beijing today, and the man stepping onto the red carpet did something almost nobody registered at first. Donald Trump landed in the Chinese capital for the first time in nearly 9 years. The first American president to make this trip since 2017, and he arrived not as the dominant partner in this relationship, but as the one asking for help. He brought with him a delegation of corporate giants: Elon Musk of Tesla, Tim Cook of Apple, Jensen Huang of Nvidia, Larry Fink of BlackRock, the CEOs of Boeing, Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, MasterCard, Cargill, Blackstone, the biggest American business mission to China in a generation. The optics could not be clearer. America is coming to Beijing, and America is bringing its wallet. Now think about what that means. 4 months ago, another world leader made the very same trip. He landed in Beijing in January. He met with Xi Jinping at the Great Hall of the People. He signed a new strategic partnership covering energy, agriculture, climate cooperation, and a 50% export expansion goal by 2030. That leader was Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada. And while Carney was quietly building a Pacific-facing relationship for Canada, Trump was on social media threatening to slap 100% tariffs on any country that dared to deal with China, including Canada. He even withdrew Canada's invitation to his so-called Board of Peace because Carney warned about economic coercion at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Most coverage is treating these two stories like unrelated chapters. They are not. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly how Carney got to Beijing first, how he came home with a deal, how Trump arrives now needing the same access, and what that quiet 4-month gap tells us about the new geometry of power between Washington, Ottawa, and the Pacific. Because what is unfolding right now is not simply a trade dispute or a diplomatic visit. It is a story about which leaders read the moment correctly and which ones are still catching up. It is a story about how power actually moves in 2026, not through threats issued from behind a social media screen, but through relationships built in rooms that matter. The gap between those two approaches is exactly what this video is about. Here is what actually happened. Donald Trump arrived in Beijing on the evening of May 13, 2026, for a 2-day summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping. The visit was scheduled to run through May 15th. The official framing from the White House described the trip as a state. That visit of tremendous symbolic significance. There would be a welcome ceremony, a bilateral meeting with President Xi at the Great Hall of the People, a visit to the Temple of Heaven, a formal state banquet to all the choreography of a successful American president, engaging a major rival from a position of strength. That is the official framing. The operational reality tells a different story. This summit was supposed to happen in March. It was postponed because of the war that the United States and Israel launched against Iran on February 28th of this year. The Trump administration predicted that war would last 4 to 8 weeks. We are now in mid-May. The war is still going. The Strait of Hormuz is under dual blockade. Global energy prices have spiked. Gas prices at the American pump have climbed significantly, and Donald Trump's approval ratings have fallen to record lows. So when Trump boarded Air Force One on Tuesday, May 12th, he was not flying to Beijing as the dominant superpower, bringing a reluctant partner to the table. He was flying as a president in need of a win. The agenda the White House has laid out is enormous. Trade, Taiwan, artificial intelligence, the Iran war, rare earth exports, semiconductor restrictions, Boeing aircraft orders, soybeans, beef, the case of Jimmy Lai, and the jailed Hong Kong publisher. Almost every contentious issue between the two countries packed into 48 hours. Think about that for a moment. Every major flashpoint, every long-running dispute, every sensitive geopolitical fault line compressed into a 2-day visit. That is not the agenda of a president coming from a position of leverage. That is the agenda of a president who has run out of time to solve problems one at a time and is now bringing them all to a single table at once and hoping something sticks. The kind of agenda that signals not strength, but urgency. And urgency in diplomacy is rarely rewarded. And then there is the delegation. The list reads like a corporate hall of fame. Tesla and SpaceX chief executive Elon Musk, despite his very public falling out with the president last year, Apple chief executive Tim Cook, on what is reported to be his final major diplomatic mission before his retirement in September. NVIDIA chief executive Jensen Huang, who joined the entourage at the last minute. BlackRock's Larry Fink, who manages roughly $10.9 trillion in assets. Goldman Sachs' David Solomon, Boeing's Kelly Ortberg, who is trying to salvage aircraft sales after Beijing raised tariffs on American goods to 125% in April of last year. Citigroup, MasterCard, Cargill, Blackstone, Micron, Qualcomm, GE Aerospace. The largest commercial delegation a sitting American president has brought to China in the modern era. Consider what that means in practice. When a president travels with that much corporate firepower, he is not negotiating peace. He is selling access. The unstated message to Xi Jinping is straightforward. Open your market, buy our planes, lift the rare earth restrictions, and in return, we will quietly soften the edges of our containment strategy. That is what is on the table. Not a grand strategic reset. Not a breakthrough on any of the fundamental disagreements that have defined this rivalry for the better part of a decade. A transactional rescue mission for an American president who is bleeding political support at home and needs results he can hold up before the midterm elections in November. That is the operational truth the White House framing is designed to obscure. The welcome ceremony, the state banquet, the carefully arranged photographs at the Great Hall of the People, all of it is choreography built around a simple underlying reality. The president of the most powerful country on earth has flown to Beijing because he needs things. He needs trade relief. He needs Iran at pressure. He needs Boeing orders. He needs something, anything, that he can bring home and describe as a victory. That is a fundamentally different posture than the one the official framing projects. And the gap between those two things matters enormously when you understand what Canada was doing 4 months ago. Even the experts the administration is briefing have lowered their expectations to the floor. The Council on Foreign Relations described the summit before it even began as an effort to stabilize the relationship rather than resolve any of the long-standing disputes. Kao Chan of the Brookings Institute put it bluntly, both sides want stability. Both sides want to reconfirm the relationship. Nobody is expecting deliverables. The Stimson Center's Dan Grazier added that Trump would at least try to enlist Xi to pressure Iran back to the negotiating table. Try, that is the word. Not succeed, not achieve. Try, the President of the United States is flying 12 hours to try, when the most optimistic framing available from sympathetic analysts uses the word try. That tells you something important about the balance of leverage in that room. Now, hold all of that against what Canada just did, because the timing matters more than almost any American outlet has been willing to say. On January 13th of this year, exactly 4 months before Donald Trump's plane touched down in Beijing, another aircraft was already landing there. It carried Prime Minister Mark Carney. It was the first visit by Canadian Prime Minister to China since 2017, the same gap that Trump is now closing. But Carney closed it first, and he did not close it from weakness. He did not land in Beijing as a leader under domestic pressure, scrambling for a photo opportunity. He walked into the Great Hall of the People. He met with President Xi Jinping, he met with Premier Li Qiang, he met with Zhao Leji, chairman of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress. He did not meet one senior Chinese official. He met 3 of the most powerful figures in the Chinese government, one after another, in a single visit. He met them not as a supplicant, but as the leader of a G7 nation, deliberately rebalancing its foreign policy away from Washington that had made clear that no longer viewed its allies as partners. And he came home with something tangible, not a promise of stability, not an agreement to keep talking, something real. Carney and Xi released a joint statement outlining a new Canada-China strategic partnership. The pillars were specific and measurable. Energy cooperation with both countries described as energy superpowers, committing to expand two-way investment in batteries, solar, wind, and energy storage, clean technology and climate competitiveness, agri-food and wood products, a formal ambition to grow Canadian exports to China by 50% by 2030, cultural exchanges, visa-free access for Canadian travelers to China, a Destination Canada agreement with China Media Group ahead of the 2026 FIFA World Cup, which Canada is co-hosting, and Beijing's support for Canada's bid to host the 2029 APEC Summit. There was more, the hard, measurable, immediate part. China agreed in principle to slash tariffs on Canadian canola seed from a combined rate of approximately 85% down to roughly 15%. That is a $4 billion market for Canadian farmers. Canola meal, lobsters, crabs, and Canadian peas were taken off the anti-discrimination tariff list. The combined effect, according to the Prime Minister's office, was to unlock nearly $3 billion in export orders for Canadian workers and businesses. $3 billion without firing a single trade war shot, without threatening anyone, without posting anything on social media, without withdrawing anyone's invitation to anything. That is not a tourism trip, that is a structural realignment. And it is worth pausing on what that realignment represents historically. It was the first time since the imprisonment of the so-called Two Michaels, Canadian citizens detained in China in 2018, that Ottawa and Beijing had opened a new chapter at the leadership level. That detention nearly severed the relationship entirely. It poisoned Canadian public opinion toward China for years. And yet Carney walked back into that room, sat across from Xi Jinping, and came away with a deal that opened billions of dollars in new trade, that required patience, preparation, and a clear-eyed understanding of where Canada's long-term interests lay. It was not an accident, it was a strategy executed with discipline. The Chinese state press called it the start of strategic autonomy for Canada. The English-language Global Times warned Ottawa not to slip back under Washington's will. Beijing's framing was explicit and deliberate. They saw Carney's visit as Canada finally stepping out of America's shadow, finally asserting that Ottawa's foreign policy serves Canadian interests first and American preferences second. That framing was not accidental. Beijing knew exactly what message it was sending and to whom. It was speaking over Carney's head directly to every other American ally watching from the sidelines. And how did Washington respond? Within days of the deal, Donald Trump went on his personal social media account. He posted, "If Governor Carney thinks he is going to make Canada a drop-off port for China to send goods and products into the United States, he is sorely mistaken." He threatened a 100% tariff on Canadian exports if Ottawa makes a deal with Beijing. He demoted Carney from Prime Minister to Governor in his own social media post. That is not a diplomatic response. That is not a strategic response. That is a reaction born of frustration. The kind of thing you say when you understand that someone else just moved the chess piece you were planning to move and have no coherent answer for it. On the sidelines of the World Economic Forum in Davos, Trump went further. Carney had given an address warning against economic coercion by the world's superpowers. Trump's response: "Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements." And then he withdrew Canada's invitation to his so-called Board of Peace, the new American-led international forum he had been promoting since January. Canada was out punished for going to Beijing, punished for signing the canola deal, punished for the Prime Minister's Davos speech. That is the sequence. A G7 ally signed a trade deal that benefited its farmers and workers, and the American president responded by throwing them out of a forum he invented and threatening to destroy their export economy. That is the record. Now, here's the part that almost nobody in American cable news is willing to say out loud. 4 months after Trump publicly threatened to economically destroy Canada for engaging Beijing, Trump himself flew to Beijing with Musk, with Cook, with Huang, with Fink, with the chief executives of Boeing and Goldman Sachs and BlackRock to ask Xi Jinping for trade access, to ask Xi Jinping for help on Iran, to ask Xi Jinping to buy American aircraft and American soybeans, to ask the same kind of engagement that he had called a betrayal when Canada did it. The same kind of engagement that he had said would justify a 100% tariff on Canadian goods. The same engagement, the same Beijing, the same Xi Jinping, 4 months later. And here is where the two stories intersect in a way that should concern anyone watching how American power is being managed in 2026. The standard has changed. When Canada engages China, Washington calls it dependency. When America engages China, Washington calls it leadership. When Ottawa signs a canola deal worth $3 billion in farm exports, the American president threatens economic warfare. When Trump signs nothing yet, brings the largest American corporate delegation in modern history and asks Beijing to bail him out of a Middle Eastern war he started, that is, in the official framing statesmanship, the math does not resolve cleanly. Either engaging China is acceptable, in which case Carney was right and the Trump tariff threats were illegitimate, or engaging China is unacceptable, in which case Trump's own summit with Xi this week is a strategic surrender. It cannot be both. You cannot construct a rule that makes Canada's $3 billion canola deal a betrayal and America's corporate lobbying mission a triumph. The logic does not hold. And yet that is exactly the position the White House is now defending. And apparently confident that the inconsistency will go unnoticed, it will not. There is one rule for Washington and another rule for everyone else, including America's closest ally and largest trading partner. Look at how Beijing is reading this. Chinese state media has spent the week reminding the world that Trump was the one who postponed the summit because of the Iran war, reminding the world that Iran's foreign minister visited Beijing just last week, reminding the world that Vladimir Putin is expected to arrive in the Chinese capital within days after Trump leaves, reminding the world, in short, that Beijing is the hub of a new diplomatic geometry and that the American president is just one of several visitors passing through, not the center of gravity, one point on the map among many. And it is not just China. Look across the Pacific, look at Europe. American allies are recalibrating their assumptions about American commitment in real time. Japan and South Korea, who have watched the Trump administration divert military resources. From the Pacific toward the Middle East, Germany and France, who have watched the Iran war drag on past every Trump prediction. India, which has continued to buy Russian oil throughout the conflict despite American sanctions and threats. And Canada, which is now 4 months ahead of the United States in opening a new commercial relationship with the world's second largest economy. Every one of those countries is doing the same quiet calculation. If Washington cannot be relied upon to stay consistent, to honor its commitments, to treat its allies as allies rather than subordinates, then those countries need options, and they are building them. You remember when the conventional wisdom was that no major American ally would dare make a separate strategic deal with Beijing. That conventional wisdom is gone. Carney did it in January. The Europeans are watching the canola deal closely. Australia is rebuilding its own wine and barley trade with China. The wall that Washington spent the better part of a decade building around Beijing is now full of doors, and Canada was the first ally to walk through one. It will not be the last. Consider the context inside the United States. Trump's approval rating is at record low territory. Gas prices are up sharply because of the Strait of Hormuz blockade. The Iran war is into its third month, with no end in near sight. The midterm elections are in November. The president needs deliverables. He needs photographs of CEOs shaking hands in the Great Hall of the People. He needs Boeing aircraft orders to announce. He needs soybean purchases to post on social media. He needs Xi Jinping to throw him a lifeline on Iran. That is the operational truth behind the choreography. This is a presidency that has run out of goodwill with adversaries and is running out of patience with the voters back home. Meanwhile, in Ottawa, Mark Carney has spent the 4 months since his Beijing trip building exactly the kind of position Canada has not held for a generation. A G7 leader with a working channel to Xi Jinping. A G7 leader with a multi-billion-dollar farm export deal already in motion. A G7 leader who has publicly warned the world's largest superpowers against economic coercion and then survived their threats without flinching, without reversing course, without apologizing. A G7 leader who is co-hosting the FIFA World Cup this year and bidding to host APEC in 2029 with explicit Chinese support for that bid. And here is the question that neither government, neither Washington nor Beijing is yet answering publicly. What happens to Canada now? Because if Trump comes home from Beijing with a deal of any size, Boeing aircraft, soybeans, rare earths, and Iran pressure agreement, then his earlier threats against Carney for doing the same thing become indefensible even in American political terms. The hypocrisy becomes impossible to paper over. And if Trump comes home empty-handed, then Carney's 4-month head start becomes the defining diplomatic story of the year, the story of a smaller country that read the room faster, moved smarter, and came away with more. Either way, the same conclusion lands: Canada read the Pacific correctly. Washington is now playing catch-up. That is not spin. That is the sequence of events. What comes next is the APEC Leaders Summit in China later this year. Mark Carney has already confirmed that he will return to Beijing for that meeting. The same Beijing that Trump is visiting this week. The same Xi Jinping that Trump is meeting with this week. The same Great Hall of the People. Carney will not be there as a supplicant. He will be there as the Canadian Prime Minister who got there first, who came home with a deal, and who held his ground when the American president called him governor and threatened to destroy his country's export economy. That is not a small thing. That is the kind of track record that builds credibility with other governments, the kind of credibility that compounds over time. There is one more piece to watch. Trump has signaled that he intends to raise Taiwan with Xi. He has even suggested he may discuss American arms sales to Taipei, language that, if mishandled, could give Beijing exactly the diplomatic opening it has wanted for decades. Analysts in Washington and Taipei are warning openly that the president's tendency to speak extemporaneously could cost the United States its long-standing strategic ambiguity on Taiwan. A single off-script sentence in the wrong room could redraw the Taiwan question for a generation. Canada, notably, has stayed entirely out of that conversation. Carney's January trip did not touch Taiwan. He left that fault line alone because he understood that Canada's interests lay in trade, not in entanglement. That is the difference in approach. One leader went to Beijing in January with a focused brief, came home with a structural deal, and refused to be drawn into theatrics. The other leader has gone to Beijing in May with the largest corporate delegation in memory, an unsolved war behind him, falling poll numbers around him, and a Taiwan minefield in front of him. And one final thing, watch the Putin visit. Russia's president is expected to arrive in Beijing within days after Trump leaves. That is not an accident of scheduling. That is Beijing reminding Washington that it has options, that it has Russia, that it has Iran, that it has the global south, and that the American president, for all the corporate jets parked at the Beijing airport this week, is one negotiation partner among several. Washington's grip on the center of global diplomacy is no longer what it once was, and the American president is, perhaps for the first time, beginning to feel it. If this story is telling you something you have not heard elsewhere, share it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear them. Like the video if you want more of this. This is Loud Truth, and I will see you in the next one.